Whoa, hey guys, August here. It's been since my last video and since my last big review, so I figure, let's talk about something. Let's make a new video on Chojin Sentai Jetman.
Part 1. What is Sentai? Now, I know what those of you unfamiliar with Super Sentai are thinking. Chojin Sentai what now? Isn't that just Power Rangers? Well, the answer is yes and no. The Super Sentai series, or in English, Super Task Force or Super Fighting Squadron, is the name of a long-running franchise of Japanese TV shows produced by Toei and Bandai in the superhero team genre, and is a subgenre of the larger genre of tokusatsu. Tokusatsu shows feature live-action characters and colorful special effects. Super Sentai is the most prominent and well-known of the shows in this style, others including the Kamen Rider series, the Ultra series, and the Metal Hero series. Super Sentai itself began airing in 1975 with Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger, and the 1992 series Kyoryu Sentai Zyuranger was adapted into the first season of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The way this adaptation happens is that the scenes with American actors are filmed, and the fight scenes are lifted directly from the Japanese Sentai shows, at least in most cases. There are some shows where original fights are shot, and even American-only Rangers are added, but that's a discussion for a different time. Let's focus on 1991's Chojin Sentai Jetman. Part 2. What is Chojin Sentai Jetman? Chojin Sentai Jetman, or Birdman Squadron Jetman, is the 15th installment in the Super Sentai franchise, originally airing from 1991 to 1992, spanning 51 episodes. It was the last season of Super Sentai not to be adapted into Power Rangers, at least until Resha Sentai Tokyuger 23 years later. Jetman takes heavy inspiration from the Gatchaman franchise, both being teams of 5 heroes donning colorful bird-themed attire, due to the poor performance of last year's Kikyu Sentai 5-Man. The Sentai franchise was put into the hands of producer Takayuki Suzuki, with Keita Amayima chosen as director. In early stages of production, Jetman was intended to be the final Super Sentai series ever produced. Takayuki Suzuki was instrumental in changing this factor, introducing a trendy, high-romance plotline into Jetman's core narrative, and just generally trying to shake up the formula. The writers of the show even proposing episodes that didn't feature the characters transforming or fighting at all, but were met with opposition from Bandai until later in the show when this wish became mostly true. Many fans cite this as the greatest or one of the greatest iterations of the franchise, and one that grossed over 15 billion yen, or about 136 million American dollars. Part 3. The plot. With all that out of the way, I'll get into the basic plot of this show. For the most part, I will be avoiding major spoilers, although things may get a little spoiler inclined when I talk about the characters themselves, so be warned. The series takes place in the year 1990X on a spaceship of the Sky Force, the keepers of the peace on planet Earth. The scientists aboard have developed what they call birdonic waves, a technology which grants superhuman abilities. 5 of these birdonic waves have been developed and will be given to 5 elite members of Skyforce from Earth to use this technology to better protect the planet. Ryu Tendo and his girlfriend Rie Aoi are the first 2 individuals chosen for this project, selected by Aya Odagiri, or better known as Commander. Ryu is successfully exposed to the birdonic waves, making him the first Jetman, Red Hawk. Suddenly, the ship is attacked by the Vyram, an evil organization from the reverse dimension. The Vyram destroy the ship, killing most of the people on board, including Ryu's lover Rie, and scattering the remaining 4 Birdonic waves across the Earth, hitting 4 random citizens. Ryu and Commander escape from the exploding ship to Earth on a mission to find the other 4. Those 4 are Kaori, a rich girl looking for something new to shake up her life, Raita, a simple farmer, Akko, a schoolgirl, and Guy, the resident bad boy. Together, they must make some kind of team to stop the Vyram's plans from conquering Earth and our dimension. That's more or less the framework which guides the viewer through this series. You spend most of the time watching this team of misfits struggle to get along with each other. That statement applying to both the heroes and the villains of this show, allowing for parallels to easily be drawn between the two. With that setup out of the way, I can finally talk about the positives and negatives of this series, and hopefully convince you to give this fantastic show a watch. Part 4. The Good. The first great aspect I'll talk about in this show is its use of visual metaphor. All throughout the show, little visual cues are placed to tell the viewer what is happening between the characters without a word being spoken. Take for instance this shot, where a white cue ball breaks the red, black, yellow, and blue cue balls apart. It conveys the team splitting up and the tension between them as a result of Kaori's actions as the White Ranger. The framing and shot composition is also used incredibly well, with your eyes being naturally led across the frame to notice details in the background that become important to the plot moments later. This kind of direction makes it clear that the people behind this show aren't just setting up a camera and saying action. There is consideration going on into the construction of these scenes and what details are important to focus on. You know, directing. That effort being put into a kid's show means a lot to me. But I also want to make it clear that even if this wasn't a kid's show, these elements would still be worth praising. I also want to make that point perfectly clear about this entire review. I think this show is great as a show, not great as a kid's show. Although, I use the term kids show a little hesitantly because there's a ton of really violent deaths in this show. Not necessarily gory deaths, mind you, but certainly bloody, gruesome deaths of actual humans in the show's universe, which serves very well to reinforce the fact that the villains are actually a legitimate and genuine threat. A threat that also gets more and more powerful as the series goes on, in very apparent ways, making the upgrades in technology the Jetmen receive not feel like the introduction of new toys, but rather a legitimate scaling up of weaponry to combat stronger and stronger opponents. It's one thing to have a character say that the villains are getting tougher and tougher, but in this show you actually feel it. The same goes for the heroes. I do love that we see characters occasionally appear in the show from previous worlds and dimensions the Vyram have conquered. It makes the Vyram feel like an even more legitimate threat, as well as expands the show's universe and makes the scope feel even grander. They have squashed rebellions in the past, so what should make the Jetmen any different? Another great aspect of the show is just how many incredibly unique episodes there are that deviate away from the standard Sentai Monster of the Week format. For instance, like the bus murder mystery episode or the gambling episode. Jetman is also notable for its overall militaristic and scientifically oriented approach to the powers, weapons, and operation of the team. Granted, scientific in the same way something like Star Trek is scientific, but I found the explanations throughout the show to be consistently good window dressing for the show itself. I was never bogged down in trying to understand the technology of the show, because the show gives you just enough that you're satisfied with what it gives you. The designs of said technology is pretty universally awesome. I love the way the cross-changer and communicator look. The design is simple but effective, and the way it is activated with the bird wings and head flipping out is really cool. I kind of wish the communicator was involved in the transformation a la the power brace in O-Ranger, but oh well. The suits themselves have a really nice balance of colors, with the white in the Ranger's core color, pink in the case of the White Ranger. Part of what's so great about the suits is just how instantly recognizable the theme of the team is. One glance at these suits and you know, oh, that team is based around birds. Perfect. Other seasons, it can be a little harder to decipher what the theme even is. But this show does a really good job at establishing that. The mecha of the show look really great. Jet Icarus combines the team's core colors in a really nice, sleek-looking design, even if it is lacking some white in places. Jet Garuda, though, kicks ass. The bird head is a really nice touch. I love the claws for hands, along with a really good blend of black, red, and yellow. Tetra Boy is regrettably the weakest of the main three mecha. He just doesn't really fit into the theme as well as the other two. The balance of red and blue does look cool, but the way he transforms kinda bugs the hell out of me. Like, why are all four of the cannons not the same length? That aside, you'll probably notice I've been avoiding talking about the characters and the romance plotline up until now. That's because they're so great, I'm going to give them their own section in the video, starting now. Part 5. The Jetmen. The characters of Jetman are what really make this show great. First, we'll start from the top with the team's leader and Red Hawk himself, Ryu Tendo. Ryu serves as the idealistic center of the team. He proves himself to be an incredibly caring and dedicated leader to his team. He refuses to give up on anyone or anything. For instance, when Guy walks away for the umpteenth time, Ryu refuses to ever accept no as an answer. This is primarily because he believes in putting the mission before himself and leaving feelings to the side. This is easier for him opposed to his teammates, who have all been universally forced into service. However, it also crushes and torments Ryu as the series goes on, and when he finally lets his emotions all out and learns that the mission and feelings can't be entirely separate, it allows him to be even more emotionally honest with his team than he was before. This turns his rival Guy into his best friend, in a development that is all too satisfying to watch play out. It also allows Ryu to be honest with Kaori about how he feels about her, directly communicating to her that he isn't over the process of grieving the love of his life, even if he still does really like her. Ryu shines brightest in little moments by referring everyone except for his direct supervisors by their names. This really serves in contrast to that militaristic formality and gives a real humanity to the team's relationships. He also has a goofier side to him too, demonstrated during the time he's not fighting against the Vyram. He's willing to play around with the team during their time off. All this combined, it allows Ryu to easily escape the all-too-common trope of a team leader whose personality is just justice and nothing else. But Jetman takes the time to make Ryu into a person. Altogether, this makes Ryu an absolutely impeccable Red Ranger, and one who I think will be really hard to top within the canon of Sentai. Next is Kaori Ruko Meiken, otherwise known as White Hawk. Kaori serves as the playful, romantic heart of the team, who is very prim, proper, and caring. She pines after both Ryu and Guy, gravitating towards the former's natural leadership and charisma, and the latter's bad boy persona. I like that Kaori clearly has a sexuality of her own, and is not just a woman forced into a relationship, because you genuinely see the complementary elements between her personality and the men she pines after. She's also not exclusively to any man she gets a whiff of. She ends up not being able to stand a childhood friend of hers who despises the poor and middle class. This contrast between being both very rich but incredibly down-to-earth leads her to form close friendships with Akko, a young schoolgirl, and Raita, a farmer from the countryside. Although her upbringing from wealth definitely does leave a bratty streak in her, she has a desire to always get her way and for things to always work out, breaking down when Guy gives her an ultimatum to decide between either himself or Ryu. Her indecisiveness leads to a large fracture in the strength of the team, without her initially realizing it. Importantly, I do not think Kaori is painted as being weak and lacking agency. She makes decisions for herself and puts her foot down when needed. Ultimately, I think she is a good addition to this team. Then there's Raita Ueshi, or Yellow Owl, and perhaps the weakest member of the core team in my opinion. He definitely fills a comedic relief role on the team, and doesn't end up having too many focus episodes for himself. Now, granted, he's not goofy 24/7, and the comedic relief is limited to occasional slapstick of being overwhelmed despite his large stature or eating a lot of food. One of the good things I can say about him is that he has a distinctly big heart. He looks out for people who are less physically able than him, and he serves as a shoulder to cry on when people are going through a tough time. Unfortunately, this mainly gets limited to Kaori and Akko. It would have been nice to see more interaction between him and Ryu or Guy. I guess if there's anything else I can say about him, he does have a distinct distaste for people who are dishonest or present themselves as something they're not, which is touched on in one of his few focus episodes, and is likely a contributing factor to why him and Guy don't get along for most of the series. Next is Akko Hayasaka, otherwise known as Blue Swallow, a character who I think actually manages to be really good in the background of the love triangle at the center of the main heroes. Akko is distinctly younger than most of the team, being in high school, but manages to find a lot of kinship in Kaori and Raita, gravitating towards Kaori's girly charms and Raita's warmer big brother nature. Unlike Kaori, she's more distant from relationships, having not found anyone who meets her absurdly high standards. However, as with almost every character flaw in this show, she does have an episode dedicated to working this out and, in a sense, discovering what it means to love and care for someone. Being a kid, Akko can be a touch greedy and rude. One of her early focus episodes is centered around being possessed by a dimensional beast who fuels and feeds on her greed. Throughout the series, she'll have cute little lines where she tries to charge her teammates money for things that otherwise seem just like friendly gestures. It doesn't happen enough where it ever becomes annoying, and is merely a nice little background detail for the character. However, behind this is a young person who is still trying to develop emotionally and overcome being the kid of the team. We see her actively participating in high school and having to choose between her duties to school and her duties to the planet. Her choices throughout the series paint her as a very responsible and mature young adult. I think she's an undersung member of the team who develops pretty well in her own right. And of course, the big man himself, who I have been saving for last, both because he's perhaps the best character and because he appears last in the opening theme song. Drumroll please. What? No. Guy Yuki. Initially, Guy enters the series as a standoffish, womanizing loner. Guy's worldview leads him to initially not teaming up with the Jetmen, and if anything, he sides more with the Vyram. He believes that humans are already ruining the world, so why stop the Vyram from destroying it? Ultimately, it can be summed up that he doesn't believe life is this grand thing, and he indulges in simpler pleasures like women, gambling, and alcohol. Him and Ryu initially clash. He directly opposes Ryu's stoic save-everybody mentality and can't stand his whole keep your emotions close to your chest rhetoric. In a way, the two of them are polar opposites. He falls in love with Kaori for her charm and class, growing to protect her and only her for about the first half of the series, all in an attempt to prove his love for her, but finding it unreciprocated, and suffers as a result of Kaori's indecision between him and Ryu. However, after seeing Ryu at his lowest, Guy ends up finally being able to support him on an emotional level. The two end up sharing drinks with each other and becoming best friends by the end of the series. Guy is able to be there for Ryu in the same way Ryu strived to be there for Guy. Ultimately, Guy's character arc and revelation throughout the show is realizing that despite trying not to care about anyone or anything around him, he is deeply emotionally invested in the world, and he wants to protect it. This is even illustrated subtly in his dialogue throughout the series. Initially, when the team is in danger, he'll only call out for Kaori, but will later go on to call out the names of other team members, sometimes referring to everyone as just guys. Guy's character arc is truly amazing and feels entirely earned. What's best about this is I've left enough on the table for you to discover on your own if you decide to watch Jetman based on my recommendation. One more for the heroes before we move on to the villains. Let's briefly talk about Commander Aya Odagiri, the team's mentor. Her best aspects as the team's mentor and overseer is that she is incredibly dedicated to human life and the life of her team. We get the sense that she doesn't see anyone in Jetman as an asset or disposable. They are all people to her. She's also able to cut back and give the team some free time and relaxation if they need it. In that sense, she's a lot like Ryu, able to balance herself and her team well. She's incredibly dedicated to keeping the team together as you would expect her to be. I see her as a pretty good mentor as the whole, not really overstepping her boundaries, but also keeping everyone else in line. She's incredibly dedicated to keeping pace with the Vyram and not letting them get the upper hand, constantly assembling new technology to combat them. Hell, she even gets a battle or two in the mechas herself, so you can't say she just sits on the sideline and lets her team get beat up. Part 6. The Vyram. And now we move on to the villains of the show, who are, like the heroes, pretty universally great, and hell, even better at points. First, it's important to establish that for most of Jetman, the Vyram do not have a single designated leader. Whoever ends up defeating the Jetman will take over as the new leader of the Vyram. So let's start by discussing the most prominent and active member of the Vyram's high command, Radagot. Radagot is scheming and outwardly narcissistic and will stop at nothing to defeat the Jetman and satisfy his petty hatred for humanity. This narcissism causes him to reject any form of leadership from the other Vyram, and leads him to backstab and scheme against them on multiple occasions, just so he can have the glory of defeating the Jetmen to himself and himself alone. However, one important thing about Radagot's backstabs is that even when he is stopping a plan that would kill the Jetmen, it never feels irrational. There's always a tactical advantage Radagot gains to personally benefit himself, be that new power, a new minion, or just being able to belittle one of his comrades for their failure. Even when Radagot is turned into a human and a young woman cares for him, he goes out of his way to kill her and purge himself of any connection to humans, saying that he does not feel love. This is also to say nothing of his actual combat on the field. He frequently goes down and fights with the Jetmen, making him feel like a real presence and a real threat throughout the series, as do all of the other members of Vyram's high command. As a whole, Radagot is a threatening antagonist and incredibly proactive throughout the series, therefore being a blast to watch. Next, there's Maria. Fair warning, to properly discuss Maria, I will have to spoil a lot about her character, so if you're interested in watching the show, please skip this section and come back once you've seen it. Last warning, 3, 2, 1. Maria is Ryu's former lover, Rie, brainwashed by Radiguet to join the Vyram. Due to this brainwashing, she has a degree of subservience to him, and Radiguet makes sure to let her know her place within the Vyram, making the relationship between the two incredibly toxic as he verbally abuses her. We delve even deeper into the toxicity of this relationship when Radiguet goes missing for an episode towards the end of the series, and Maria finds herself concerned about his well-being. Even when faced with the aforementioned verbal abuse and tension between the two. Despite that subservience, Maria still seeks to claim independence in the ranks of the Vyram. Her creation of the biodimensional bugs firmly establishes her agency in the series. She still has a distinct hunger for power and control over the other Vyram, and this does lead her astray, especially when she falls right into Radiguet's plans, and is manipulated by him from time to time, most notably in the show's endgame. She also has a strong connection with Gray, playing the piano for him, but I will discuss their relationship more in the section about Gray. Speaking of, Gray is a robot and is as a result the coldest and most calculating member of the Vyram, but he also isn't that at all. In total, he only sends down 3-dimensional and biodimensional beasts, all of which have a very clear and calculated scheme to defeat the Jetmen, and in all 3 cases, he's almost successful. Gray has a soft spot for Maria, particularly her ability to play piano, and as a result, he develops a strong emotional attachment for her, seeking to care for her when she's at her lowest. Gray sees something human in Maria that the other members of the Vyram simply lack. However, Gray's cold and mechanical outer shell creates a literal divide between the two, and so as a result, Gray is never able to properly care for Maria's needs. That being said, the two's relationship gets stronger and stronger as the series progresses, finding themselves drawn closer and closer together by the circumstances of the clash between Radiguet and Tranza, the two worried about the future stability of the Vyram. What's most fascinating about Gray is him managing to find humanity in himself and others in spite of being a robot. The final member of the Vyram High Command is Tran, or as he is later known in the series, Tranza. Tran is the youthful, childish member of the Vyram who is incredibly arrogant. As such, he uses his age to mock and taunt the Jetmen when he is able to defeat them. Tran clearly treats the battlefield more as a playground, constantly teleporting around and using telekinetic abilities to goof around and toy with the Jetmen. While his constant laughing and taunting can get annoying for some viewers, I personally never found it annoying myself. It always felt in line with the character being portrayed. Ironically, this also leads to him being looked down upon by the other Vyram, especially when his schemes are foiled. This leads to him taking up a power upgrade and becoming Tranza, a physically older and much more powerful version of himself. Now, Tranza's arrogance and petty childishness is backed up by physical ability, and he becomes an even greater threat to the Jetmen, but also to the Vyram themselves. The 12-episode-long arc which this story takes place in is one of the best in the whole show, and like Guy's arc, is so great that even if the rest of the show wasn't, it would still be worth watching. So now we've talked about the main villains. Let's talk about the dimensional beasts and biodimensional beasts, even if only for a little bit, because they are important to the grander narrative and themes of Jetman. The dimensional beasts are created from dimensional bugs, a parasitic organism which, when planted onto an object, will then go on to fuse with that object and create a monster. The dimensional beasts serve as critiques of human society from the perspective of the Vyram. For instance, take Road Dimension, a critique upon humanity's road-dependent society. This expands even further to things like vanity, self-image, and even pollution. The biodimensional beasts are much more combat-oriented, being themed around weaponry, but are still criticisms of Earth in a different way. The biodimensional beasts use DNA from Earth's creatures to power them up, so they serve as perversions of our natural world. Even the monsters of the week having thought put into them shows just how much the creative team behind this show really cared about the final product. Part 7. The Bad. Now, for as much as I've praised the show up to this point, there are some negatives which must be addressed. The first of these criticisms involves the editing. The editing throughout the show feels quite wonky if you don't accustom yourself to it. To grasp this point, you must understand that these episodes only run for some 20 minutes instead of the usual television standard of 23 minutes. I have to assume that's just how Japanese television was broadcast back in the early 90s. Now, 3 minutes doesn't seem like it would make a big difference in a pacing of the show like this, and for the most part it doesn't, but there are moments throughout the series where things are cut away from without a terrible amount of clarity as to what happened. Now, granted, for the most part, it's easy enough to assume the logical progression of events, and that's fine. It just takes some getting used to, and you have to accept it as part of the series. However, this does lead to episodes like Episode 27, the Hell Dimension episode, where things become a complete and utter clusterfuck because of editing. This episode is an exception to the rule, because otherwise the editing is just fine once you get used to it. What isn't so easy to accustom yourself to or forgive is the midsection of this show. There is a solid chunk of filler episodes after a large 1-2 punch of game-changing reveals that really drags down the pace of the middle of this show, the aforementioned Hell Dimension episode being included in this stretch. The show really simmers down in a moment where I feel the tension should have kept escalating and escalating. That being said, the show's pacing is just perfect for the last third, right after this dull stretch of episodes end. The final point I'd like to bring up is the underutilization of some of the ideas throughout the show. For instance, the metamoles were a really interesting idea introduced at the very last possible minute in a very tacky episode. The idea behind metamoles is that they're an entity from the reverse dimension that creates a monster based on a targeted person's worst fear. In the one episode they're featured in, a metamole latches onto Rita and creates the Great Tomato King. Now, these monsters could have served as a really interesting insight into the psychology of each of the core members of the cast, but they're only featured in episode 46, one episode before the show's 5-part endgame. The other really underutilized concept of the show is the Majins. The Majins were pitched as the natural predators to humans, and as a result didn't really have allegiance with either the Vyram or the Jetmen. This concept of villains was good enough to last for a whole season of big bads in my opinion, but they only play a prominent role in one 3-parter. I have to grant that the stretch of episodes they're featured in is really great, and is a really good 3-parter which brings a fantastic conclusion to one of the show's longest running plot threads, and does finally end the aforementioned rut of episodes in the middle of the show. So, while the episodes themselves are great, I just wish the concept behind the villains was utilized in a fuller context. Who knows, maybe it is in some future Sentai show I haven't seen. Those are basically my 3 main issues with the show. Otherwise, I think Jetman is pretty great. Part 8. Conclusion. To wrap up this review, I want to briefly touch on the overall thematic core of Jetman. The thematic center of Jetman is one of unity and teamwork, not on a professional level, but a personal level. The series starts out with the Jetmen in complete disarray, their personalities clashing, and their professional lives at odds with their personal lives. And the Vyram start as relatively organized and consistent on a professional level. The battle the Jetmen fight is always uphill. They are always trying to overcome their differences and fight the enemy at the same time. Therein lies the reason why the Jetmen succeed. They overcome their personal differences and come to love and respect each other as people. In contrast, the Vyram never form strong personal relationships and connections, and this ends up being their downfall. Jetman is about the human spirit overcoming the challenges it faces. Be those challenges criticisms of human society dished out by the Vyram in the form of the dimensional beasts, or personal emotional challenges. That is what makes Chojin Sentai Jetman so great, and so worth your time.
Hey guys, August here again. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video was a lot of effort. A whole lot of effort. I'm filming this after the fact. It took me I was really speed running through this. I stayed up all night one night to get it done because I just wanted to get it done. I really wanted to get this video out there. And I was just really, I really thought it was, it's something it's been a lot of work, more work than even my Elfen Lied video in the past, which was like 2 weeks of work, but that compressed into like 3-4 days here in this case. So yeah, tell me what you think. Did you like the video? Did you dislike the video? Why? What other shows? What do you want to see me cover, like Sentai-wise or otherwise? What should I do next? What do you think of Jetmen? What do you think of the review? You know, everything. Thanks for watching, and bye.